I'm a 55-year-old guy trying to pretend I still know how to date. The divorce left me tired, lonely, and bored enough to download Tinder. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few chats, maybe some forced small talk. But a few days in, a woman named Lana matched with me. She looked mid-30s, confident. The kind of person who seems used to getting attention. I wasn't fooled into thinking someone as he was actually interested in me, but the conversation felt natural, and she didn't vanish after 5 messages. So I went along with it. After a week of chatting, she suggested meeting at a bar near my place. I worked up the nerve to say yes. I kept it low expectations. Just a drink and maybe a decent night that didn't end with me watching TV alone. When I got there, she was already sitting at the counter. Seeing her in person was strange. She looked like her photos, but sharper. Her eyes didn't blink much, and her smile stayed still a second too long every time she laughed. I ignored it because I wanted this to go well. We ordered drinks and talked for an hour. She asked a lot about my house, my job, when I was usually home. Stuff people ask, sure, but it felt like she was collecting details. I still pushed that thought away. I'm not paranoid, I told myself. I'm just out of practice. The night moved fast and she leaned closer every time she spoke. When she put her hand on mine, I felt more surprised than flattered. I wasn't used to attention anymore. She lowered her voice and said we should continue talking somewhere more private. Before answering, I watched her expression. It didn't show interest, it showed intention. Focused, almost rehearsed. I tried not to react. I just nodded and said my place was close enough to walk. The walk back felt heavy. She kept glancing around like checking the street for something. I told myself she was just being cautious, but her steps were too controlled, too quiet. I tried to talk to ease the tension, but she stopped replying as much. She just gave short answers and kept scanning the sidewalk. When we reached my place, she stepped in before I even turned on the lights. She walked around slow, looking at every corner, every shelf, every door. I pretended not to notice. I didn't want to start a fight with a stranger inside my own house. I just needed to stay calm and watch. I offered her a drink to break the weird silence. She smiled again, the long stiff smile, and walked over to the kitchen counter where I was preparing the glasses. Before anything happened, I had a moment where my whole body got tense. Not because of fear, but because something clicked. Everything she asked, every glance she made, every step she took inside my house finally made sense. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. She stood near the counter with her phone out. She kept holding it low, angled toward the door. Not toward me. Toward the entrance. I waited. She didn't notice I was watching her reflection in the microwave door. When I turned my back to get ice, I saw it. Her hand slid something small into my glass. Quick, practiced, nothing clumsy about it. She didn't even look nervous. She just kept talking about the bar like she hadn't done anything. I felt my stomach twist, but I forced myself to stay neutral. I couldn't show her I saw. She brought the drinks to the living room, and I sat on the couch acting tired. I raised my glass near my lips and let it touch them without drinking it. I put the glass on the table and leaned back. I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing like I was passing out. I heard her move. Not slow, not cautious. Immediate. She stood up fast, grabbed my jacket from the chair, reached into the pocket, and took the keys. Then she whispered something I couldn't understand. The door opened a second later. Right before anything else happened, I kept my eyes shut and listened. The tension felt like pressure inside my chest. I forced myself to stay completely limp, breathing through my nose. I needed just a few seconds to understand what was happening before I made any move. Heavy steps came in. A man. His voice was low and rough. He walked straight to where she was standing. They spoke fast and quiet, but they weren't hiding their tone. They weren't worried about waking me because they thought I was out cold. She said the place was clear. He said they needed to hurry. She told him to check the bedroom while she searched the drawers. They weren't panicked. They'd done this before. I opened my eyes just a crack. She had my wallet out already, pulling out cards. The guy walked into the hallway, shoes dragging slightly like he had something heavy in his coat. I slid off the couch slow and stayed low. My heart was beating way too fast. I knew if they saw me awake, I wouldn't get a second chance. I crawled behind the dining table, using the chairs as cover. The guy moved deeper into the house, opening doors without care. She walked deeper into the kitchen, grabbing everything she could without even looking at it. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. I grabbed the closest thing I could reach, a metal flashlight I kept under the side table. My hands were shaking, but I held onto it as tight as I could. I wasn't going to attack anyone unless I had to, but if one of them walked toward me, I'd have no choice. Before making a move, I took a moment to steady my breathing. I needed that pause because the next minute would decide if I stayed alive. Every step they took echoed through the house. I stayed low, listening for who would come back from the hallway first. The man stepped out of the hallway and headed to the living room. If he turned left, he'd see me behind the chairs. If he turned right, he'd go toward the bathroom. I pressed myself against the floor and waited. He turned left. I could see his shoes moving closer, slow steps scanning the room. I held the flashlight and tried to stay still, but his steps stopped right beside the table. Too close. He was going to look underneath. When his body leaned down, I reacted without thinking. I pushed myself up and swung the flashlight into the side of his face. The impact made him fall onto the floor. He didn't pass out, but he was stunned long enough for me to scramble away. He tried to grab my leg, but I kicked his arm and ran toward the kitchen where she was. She turned around fast, eyes wide, and reached into her purse. She wasn't scared. She was angry I ruined their plan. She lunged to block me from the front door. I pushed past her, but she grabbed my jacket and pulled me back. I stumbled, hit the counter with my shoulder, and dropped the flashlight. The guy was getting back up behind me. I picked up the closest thing on the counter, a wooden cutting board. I hit her with it to push her away, not to hurt her badly, just enough to make her let go. She fell onto the floor, swearing under her breath. The guy charged at me, and I blocked him with the board. It cracked in half. He grabbed my arm and shoved me into the wall. His strength was too much. I felt my knees buckle. I reached up and grabbed a drawer handle to stay standing. The drawer slid open and a metal utensil dropped out. I didn't even look at what it was. I grabbed it and swung it at him. It hit his shoulder, enough to make him yell and loosen his grip. I shoved him away and ran to the door. She was getting up, and he was right behind me. But I managed to unlock the door and push it open. I stumbled out into the yard, yelling for help. They didn't follow. They stayed inside, grabbing whatever they could before running out the back. Before anything else, I stayed outside for a full minute, catching my breath. I kept my eyes on every window, waiting to see if one of them would try to come back. My hands were shaking so much, I could barely hold my phone when I tried to call for help. When officers arrived, I walked them through the house. They found drawers open, my things on the floor, and marks where the man had stepped on the hallway walls. They asked for descriptions, but I didn't have much to give. Their faces felt like blurred shapes because I spent the entire time trying not to die instead of memorizing details. An ambulance checked my shoulder and ribs. Nothing broken, just bruised. They told me I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt stupid, angry, and embarrassed that I let someone like that inside my house. The officers stayed for an hour gathering evidence. They said this kind of setup wasn't rare. A fake date, a quick drug, then a partner breaking in to rob the place. They said sometimes it ended a lot worse. I stood in my living room looking at the mess. My house felt like it belonged to someone else now. Every corner felt wrong. The next morning, the sunlight made everything look normal again. But it wasn't. I sat at my table, staring at the untouched glass she had drugged. I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. I deleted Tinder, blocked every unknown number on my phone, and bought new locks. I kept replaying the moment I saw her drop something into my drink. That tiny movement probably saved my life. I still go to work, still buy groceries, still try to act normal. But my house doesn't feel safe anymore. Every time I hear a step outside at night, I freeze and wait. I'm not scared of being alone. I've lived alone for years. What scares me is that I let someone walk right into my house because I wanted to feel wanted again. I don't know if that makes me naive or just human. But I know one thing. I won't let anyone like her inside ever again. Chisako Kakihi, Japan's Black Widow, was convicted of poisoning her lovers and amassing a fortune. According to the ruling, Kakihi tricked her partners into taking cyanide, telling them it was a healing drink, so she could inherit their assets and pay off her debts. I matched with Lewis on Tinder after a few boring weeks of scrolling. His messages were steady and normal, and talking to him felt calm enough to lower my guard. We chatted every night, and the rhythm between us felt easy. When he asked me out, I accepted because I needed a break from everything. When he picked me up, he looked exactly like in his photos. Same messy hair, same quiet smile. He talked slowly, asked simple questions, and paid attention to my answers. There was nothing strange or uncomfortable about him, and for a moment, I felt lucky to meet someone who didn't push anything too fast or act in a strange way. When he invited me to his house after dinner, I hesitated. He didn't pressure me, and he waited with a patient expression that felt harmless. I agreed because I didn't want to end the night yet. I kept telling myself that people deserved chances and that I was being responsible. After we ate, he asked if I wanted to go to his house. I hesitated for a second, but he didn't push me. He just waited. So I said yes. I still felt safe enough to trust him. His house was in a quiet neighborhood. The house looked clean, quiet, and very organized. Nothing seemed out of place. We talked on the couch for a while, and although the silence between us grew longer, I tried to ignore my nerves and stay present. I asked to use the bathroom, and he pointed down a long hallway. The house felt very still, and my footsteps were the only sound I heard. Halfway to the bathroom, I felt a sharp wave of tension in my chest that made me slow down. It wasn't a feeling I could explain well. It just made my body tighten without warning. When I turned toward the bathroom door, I saw a woman standing a few steps away. Her breathing looked shallow, like she had been scared for a long time. Her eyes locked on mine with a desperate intensity that made my stomach twist. She lifted her hand slightly and whispered, "You have to leave, now." My chest tightened. She wasn't crying or shaking, but her eyes were fixed on mine with a seriousness that hit immediately. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but I heard steps behind me. Slow steps. Lewis. I looked back at the woman, ready to ask her what was going on, but she was gone. Not walking away. Gone. The hallway was empty. I was completely panicked. I didn't understand what was happening. Lewis stood a few steps behind me. "Who are you talking to?" His voice was flat and calm, like nothing unusual had happened. I asked him if he lived with someone, but he said he lived alone. My heart pounded. I insisted we check the house, and he agreed. We walked through every room, and everything looked clean and empty. No signs of anyone living there. No bags, no clothes, no shoes, nothing. His face didn't show confusion or fear. He looked almost bored, like he was going through the motions. When we returned to the living room, the silence settled in a heavy way that made my pulse race. I tried to sit normally, but my body wouldn't calm down. His eyes stayed on me without blinking, and the longer he stared, the more trapped I felt in that small, quiet room. "Sit. Don't worry, you're safe." His tone wasn't comforting. It felt like a command covered in politeness. I sat because standing felt worse. Every part of me was alert. I didn't show it, but it was there, pushing against my ribs. Lewis kept talking about ordinary things, but he wasn't really talking. He was watching me, observing how I reacted. I answered everything calmly, hoping to keep him settled. The woman's warning repeated over and over in my mind. Leave now. I stood up slowly and told him I needed to go home. He lifted his head with a slow movement and stared at me like he didn't understand why I was leaving. I repeated that I wanted to go home, and his posture stiffened. He stepped forward and blocked the space between me and my bag. His voice came out firmer than before, and it carried a quiet edge that made my skin crawl. Stay a little longer. I told him I really needed to go. I reached for my bag, but he stood up. Stay. I took a step back. Lewis reached into his pocket, and I saw the handle of a hammer sticking out. My heartbeat thudded hard, but I forced myself to think clearly. Running toward the door felt impossible. He was too close. Lewis raised the hammer slightly, and I reacted without thinking. I grabbed a heavy vase from the table and swung it toward him with all the strength I had. The vase hit his forearm and cracked, making him stumble back, but he didn't fall. His eyes sharpened in a way that made his calmness even more disturbing. He swung the hammer toward my shoulder, but I twisted my body fast enough to avoid a direct hit. The metal grazed my arm, sending pain down my side, but the rush kept me moving. I sprinted down the hallway while he regained his balance, and his footsteps followed quickly with a steady, determined rhythm. I reached the nearest bathroom and slammed the door shut. I knew it wouldn't hold him for long, so I scanned the room for anything that could help me. The only place I could hide quickly enough was a closet on the far wall. I ran inside and pulled the door closed. As I crouched in the dark, something brushed against my leg. I looked down, and my entire body locked in horror. The girl from the hallway lay inside the closet, her neck twisted, her skin pale, and her eyes fixed in a dead stare. Her body was stiff and cold. Her warning had come from someone who was already gone. Lewis walked into the bathroom, and his breathing filled the room. He called my name with a calm tone that made bile rise in my throat, and his footsteps circled the room with slow patience, like he had done this before. When his footsteps shifted to the far corner of the room, I pushed the closet door open just enough to slip out quietly. The floor creaked under my foot, and he spun around immediately. His eyes locked onto me with a sharp hunger, and he charged with the hammer raised. I ran toward the front door, and he grabbed my arm hard enough to make my skin burn. I kicked his knee with all my strength, and his grip loosened just enough for me to break free. I reached the door, unlocked it, and threw myself outside. The cold air hit my face as I ran across the yard. His footsteps followed for several seconds before stopping suddenly. When I looked back, he stood in the doorway watching me with a silent, focused stare that promised he would remember me. The police found the girl's body exactly where I saw it. Her name was Clara, and she had been missing for months. They found torn clothes and hidden tools inside the bedroom walls. They searched for Lewis for a week, but he disappeared before they could track him. I keep thinking about Clara's warning in the hallway. She wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to save me. She reached me even after she died. I lived because she didn't want someone else to end like her. Jesse Shane Kempson was convicted in 2019 for murdering a young British tourist, Grace Mullane, whom he met through a dating app. He strangled her in his apartment in Auckland, then hid her body in a suitcase and dumped it in a forest outside the city. Further investigations revealed he had also raped and assaulted other women he'd met via dating apps. He is now serving a life sentence with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years.
I matched with Aaron on Tinder after a long day, and we started talking steadily. Not in a dramatic way, but in a simple rhythm that made it easy to keep answering. He asked about work, about music, about basic things that didn't feel forced, and the conversation flowed at a pace that kept me engaged without making me suspicious. For 3 nights we sent each other voice notes until late, and there was something calm in his tone that made it feel safe enough to move forward. On the 4th day, he disappeared completely, not answering anything I sent, even though the messages showed he was active. I waited, got annoyed, and deleted the chat. 2 days later, he appeared again saying he had personal problems and wanted to explain in person. I didn't buy the excuse, but I agreed to meet because I wanted to confront him directly and end the whole thing with a clear understanding. He sent an address and said his sister would open the door since he might be late. I didn't like the idea of meeting family first, but I convinced myself it was simple. I got ready quickly, called a ride, and headed to the house he sent. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every sound. But I didn't stop because I wanted answers more than reassurance. I knocked once and the door opened almost instantly, revealing a woman standing stiffly in the frame. She didn't smile, didn't introduce herself in a friendly way, and only said she was Aaron's sister before stepping aside to let me in. Her eyes followed every movement I made like she was evaluating me with more intensity than necessary. I walked into the living room, noticing how clean everything looked, the kind of clean that feels prepared for a specific purpose. She told me Aaron was delayed and asked me to wait, but her tone didn't match the words because she sounded tense, as if the delay irritated her more than it should. She sat in the chair across from the couch, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. Every time I looked at her, her eyes were already locked on me, unblinking, almost studying the way I breathed. A long silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, and she didn't bother to hide how focused she was on my face. I tried to ask something casual, but she answered with short nods that didn't fit the rhythm of the conversation. The longer she stayed quiet, the more her jaw tightened, and her breathing shifted from calm to uneven. Then she stood up slowly, her eyes sharpening as she took a step toward me. She came closer without saying anything, her attention fixed on me like she expected me to react first, and the tension grew in a heavy, steady way that made my pulse quicken. Her face looked strained, as if she was holding back words she wanted to release all at once. She placed herself directly in front of me, close enough that I could see her chest rising with each uneven breath. She asked how long I had known Aaron, but the question didn't sound curious. It sounded accusatory, as if I had already done something to offend her. I answered in a steady tone, but as soon as the words left my mouth, her eyes narrowed, and she leaned slightly closer, watching me with an intensity that made my shoulders tense. She asked why I liked him, but her voice cracked halfway through, revealing a frustration she wasn't trying to hide anymore. She reached for the armrest beside my leg, gripping it so hard her knuckles paled, and the vibration in her hand made it clear she was fighting something inside herself. I shifted my posture, ready to stand if necessary, but I held still long enough to understand what she was building toward. Her breathing quickened as she slid closer, close enough that her knee almost touched mine, and the pressure she radiated filled the room in a way that made escape feel urgent, even before she revealed it. She leaned over to me, her voice shaking as she asked if Aaron ever mentioned her, and when I told her no, something snapped behind her expression. Her lips twitched, her shoulders stiffened, and a tremor went through her entire body as she dropped the sister act completely. She said she wasn't his sister. She was his partner, and she coordinated the meeting to make sure I understood that nobody would interfere with what she had built with him. She sat next to me abruptly, pressing her knee into mine with a force that made my leg numb. She told me she saw every message he wrote, that she managed everything he did online, and that she had the right to stop any woman who got too close. Her tone carried a bitter certainty, like she'd repeated these lines in her head for days, preparing to deliver them with full conviction. I tried to move away, but her hand shot out and clamped around my wrist with surprising strength. Her grip tightened until pain shot through my arm, and her eyes filled with a raw fury that made my throat tighten. She started ranting about how people tried to ruin her happiness, how Aaron belonged to her, and how she wouldn't allow someone like me to walk away without understanding why she needed to do this. I pulled my arm sharply, breaking her grip for a second, but she lunged toward me again, grabbing at my clothes with shaking hands. I bolted up from the couch, but she threw herself at me with enough force to knock both of us sideways. My shoulder hit the edge of the doorway, sending a jolt of pain down my arm, and she clawed at my jacket, trying to pull me back toward the living room. Her voice rose into a frantic mixture of yelling and gasping as she screamed that I needed to stop running, that she was done letting people get in the way. I twisted my body hard and broke free from her grip for a moment, sprinting toward the table near the hallway. I grabbed the first object I could reach, a heavy ceramic vase that felt solid enough to matter. She came at me again with both arms outstretched, her fingers curled like she meant to wrap them around my neck. I swung the vase into her shoulder with enough strength to push her sideways. She stumbled but didn't fall, and she lunged again with the same blind determination, her face twisted with desperate rage. I swung the vase a second time, hitting her upper arm, and she cried out as her body buckled. She dropped to her knees, gripping her arm tightly as she tried to force herself back up, even though her limbs shook from the impact. I didn't wait for her to recover. I rushed to the door, fumbling with the lock as her dragging footsteps came closer behind me. Her voice cracked as she yelled that I didn't understand what I was destroying, and that I deserved what was coming. I got the door open and ran outside, putting as much distance as I could between myself and the house. I called for help once I reached the corner, keeping my eyes on the house as I waited for the police to arrive. When the officers entered, I stayed behind them, clutching my shaking hands together as I listened to their voices echo through the hallway. It didn't take long before they brought her out in handcuffs. Her face was blank, but her eyes burned with a hatred that made me step back instinctively. They told me they searched the house and found no trace of Aaron, no clothing, no photos, nothing suggesting he had ever lived there. His Tinder account had been deleted minutes earlier, leaving no way to trace him. The officers said she likely created multiple fake profiles to lure women into situations she controlled, pushing the fantasy of a man who didn't exist to feed whatever obsession had taken over her. I asked no questions. I just wanted to leave. The court later confirmed that she confessed to planning everything, saying she monitored women she felt threatened by and waited for the right moment to confront them. She said she needed to remove anyone who tried to take what she believed she had, even though Aaron was nothing but a digital mask she built herself. They sentenced her quickly. I deleted Tinder, not out of fear, but because the idea of trusting a stranger through a screen felt impossible after stepping into a house that wasn't meant to welcome me, but trap me. I still think about the moment the door opened too fast, the way she stared at me like she had practiced it, and the sharp shift in her expression when she dropped the lie. What scares me the most isn't what she did. It's how fast I walked inside that house without seeing any of it coming.